Emily Charlotte Le Breton was born on the 13th of October 1853 in Jersey, just off the coast of Normandy, France. Her father was William Corbett Le Breton, Dean of Jersey, and her mother was Emily Davis Martin, a woman recognised for her beauty. Known simply as Lillie or the Duchess throughout her childhood, she was the second youngest of her 6 siblings, all of whom were boys. Growing up, she enjoyed her brother's company. Together, they would climb trees, swim, fish, and ride horses in the hills near their home. They also played practical jokes on their neighbours. As a young girl, she was well educated. Initially, a French governess taught her, but apparently, young Lillie was too difficult to manage, and so she was soon educated by her brother's tutor. Her father, as the Dean of Jersey, was the leader of the Church of England in Jersey. This was a very respectable position, but despite this, William Le Breton had a known reputation as a ladies' man. He was frequently unfaithful to his wife, fathering many illegitimate children. Eventually, his antics started to damage his reputation. After many years of enduring this, his wife Emily finally grew tired of his ways and decided to leave him in 1880. Since her childhood, Lillie had lived on the island she called home. By the time she was 15, she had received various marriage proposals, yet these were turned down. That year, she visited London and loved the city. She hoped to one day become part of London's glittering society. A few years later, Lillie was courted by a man for around 4 months, trying all he could to conquer her. This man was an Irish landowner, 6 years her senior, named Edward Langtry. The couple married on the 9th of March 1874. Lillie was 20 and her husband 26. After some time in Jersey, they went to live in Southampton. All that Edward wished for was an obedient wife that enjoyed the quiet life of the countryside. However, this wasn't the life that Lillie wanted. It took her various years to convince Edward to finally move to London. Together, they lived in an apartment in Eaton Place, Belgravia. In 1877, Lillie was invited to a high society reception through a friend of her father, Thomas Heron Jones. This was the first high society event which she had ever attended, but immediately she was noted for her beauty and wit. That evening, the artist Frank Miles, admiring her beauty, decided to do several sketches of her. These would later become most popular on postcards. Yet, the strange thing was that Frank Miles and Lillie had yet to be introduced. In an interview, Lillie stated this regarding Miles. He went to his clubs and among his artist friends, declaring he had seen a beauty, and he described me to everybody he knew, until one day, one of his friends met me and he was duly introduced. Then, Mr. Miles came and begged me to sit for my portrait. I consented, and when the portrait was finished, he sold it to Prince Leopold. From that time, I was invited everywhere and made a great deal by many members of the royal family and nobility. On the 24th of May, 1877, Lillie was invited to another society event, this time a dinner party. On this occasion, she sat next to the Prince of Wales, future King of England, Edward VII. Meanwhile, her husband was seated at the other end of the table. The Prince of Wales was a married man who had 6 children, but in spite of this, he was a known philanderer. Following the dinner party, he set his sights on Lillie. It wasn't long until he was infatuated by her, and she soon became his mistress. Although his wife, Princess Alexandra, had to put up with the prince's rakish behaviour, she made sure not to show any jealousy. In a way, she even accepted Lillie as her husband's lover. As Lillie became more integrated into high society, she moved into a house at 17 Norfolk Street, off Park Lane with her husband. By now, Lillie was a noted beauty. She was loved and envied for her wasp-waist figure, her height, and her elegant nature. In 1878, Sir John Everett Millais painted Lillie's portrait. He entitled his work A Jersey Lily, which later became her nickname. The portrait was one of the most celebrated paintings of its day. When it was exhibited at the Royal Academy, huge crowds rushed to see it. The following year, while she was visiting Millais in Scotland, a friend of the painter, Rupert Potter, took various pictures of Lillie, aiming to improve his photography skills. Other known artists who painted her include Edward Poynter and Sir Edward Burne-Jones. When Lillie was posing for her portrait at Millais' studio, she met a prominent politician called William Ewart Gladstone. They later became close friends, and Gladstone served as a mentor to her. He went on to be the British Prime Minister a total of 4 times. Gladstone gave her great advice, but one quote that sticks out is when he stated, "In your professional career, you will receive attacks, personal and critical, just and unjust. Bear them, never reply, and above all, never rush into print to explain or defend yourself." In the summer of 1879, Lillie began an affair with the Earl of Shrewsbury. The couple were so passionate for one another, they even planned to run away together in January 1880. However, their plans came to an end by a scandal that was created by the journalist Adolphus Rosenberg. In the autumn of 1879, he wrote of rumours that Edward Langtry would divorce Lillie due to her infidelity, citing various men as co-respondent, including the Prince of Wales. Lillie's liaison with the Prince lasted for almost 3 years. It ended in June 1880 when she became pregnant. During this time, she was even presented to Queen Victoria. Following this, they remained friends to a degree. Although they saw little of each other, the Prince remained fond of her and always spoke well of her. He even gave her a sum of money when she became pregnant, and later used his influence to aid Lillie in her career path. Unfortunately for Lillie and her husband, they couldn't afford the high society lifestyle that they displayed. Their debts slowly racked up, and as Lillie no longer had the backing of the Prince of Wales, creditors closed in. In light of this, Lillie decided to sell many of her possessions, paying off her debts. This way, her husband wouldn't go bankrupt. Before Lillie became pregnant, she had a short affair with Prince Louis of Battenberg. However, at the same time, she had an ongoing relationship with a childhood friend, Arthur Clarence Jones, who was the brother of her sister-in-law. Although it wasn't certain who the father of Lillie's child was, it most definitely wasn't her husband. By this time, Lillie's relationship with her husband was hostile. In the first few years of marriage, she lost all love and respect for her husband. He had few hobbies and spent most evenings downing bottles of whiskey before stumbling off to bed, drunk. She told Prince Louis of her pregnancy, leading him to believe that it was his child. Following this, the prince told his parents, and he was immediately assigned to the warship HMS Inconstant. It's widely thought that it was indeed her old friend Arthur Jones who was the father. This was because of passionate letters which they exchanged. Furthermore, Jones accompanied her to Paris when her daughter Jean Mary was born in March 1881. After the birth of her daughter, her friend Oscar Wilde introduced her to acting. She decided to embark on her theatre career, first performing in an amateur production in mid-November. Following this, she was aided by the former professional actress Henrietta Labouchere. Thanks to this, Lillie's skills vastly improved, and her professional debut took place at the Haymarket in December 1881. Although she had her critics, due to her being a socialite, and for not starting from the very bottom, she was loved by the public. Whenever she appeared, box office earnings were huge. Sadly, her husband wasn't at all supportive of her career, yet as his earnings had decreased, he couldn't say much. When Lillie was busy, her mother, Emily Davis Martin, looked after her daughter. She played a significant role in her upbringing. Early in 1882, Lillie started her own company while still under the tutelage of Henrietta Labouchere. With the aid of her teacher, her company toured England, performing many plays. Lillie then did her first tour of the US, arriving in October of the same year. Unfortunately, their opening show in the States was postponed after the theatre they were meant to perform in burnt down the night before. Despite the bad start, the show was moved to another venue and ended up being extremely successful. By May 1883, the tour was finished, and Lillie, as well as her company, had made huge profits. She continued to act throughout her life. In 1889, she played the role of Lady Macbeth in Shakespeare's play Macbeth. In 1903, she performed in the US, starring in The Crossways. Lillie even went on tour in the States on 2 further occasions, once in 1906 and again in 1912. Lillie even starred in a 1913 film called His Neighbour's Wife. In 1917, she retired from the stage, making her last appearance in the theatre in London. While Lillie was touring in the US, she began a relationship with a wealthy American who had inherited his grandparents' fortune. Frederick Gebhard was a young sportsman and horse owner. This gentleman was only 22 years old, while Lillie was 7 years his senior. Yet, she soon fell in love with the man and devoted herself wholeheartedly to him. During Lillie's relationship with Fred, the couple decided to buy adjoining ranches in Lake County, California. On her ranch, which was 4,200 acres, Lillie produced red wine. To this day, the vineyard still operates. Lillie was so in love that she wished to marry Fred. So, in June 1887, she applied for American citizenship and filed for divorce. Yet her husband Edward had no intention of ever complying. He wouldn't budge, even when she bribed or threatened him. It was thanks to Fred that Lillie's passion for horse racing commenced. The pair enjoyed the sport, and they decided to buy and transport a stable of American horses to England. Unfortunately, on the 13th of August, 1888, disaster struck for the couple. The rail car transporting their 16 racehorses derailed at Shoalhaller, Pennsylvania. The car then rolled down an 80-foot embankment and burst into flames. This resulted in the death of 1 person and 11 of their horses, including their champion runner, Eole. Following this, Fred was devastated. Sadly, things in the relationship changed as well. They started to argue more often, and Fred realised that as long as Edward Langtry lived, Lillie would never truly be free. Slowly, they grew apart from each other and ultimately broke up in 1891. Fred ended up marrying another woman in 1895. In 1889, Lillie was placing a bet on a horse when a young man came up to her offering her some advice, as well as stake money. The man she met was George Alexander Baird, an eccentric young bachelor with vast estates in Scotland, a large breeding stud, a racing stable, and more money that he knew what to do with. This wealth was largely thanks to him inheriting his family fortune. After Lillie's relationship ended with Fred, she started a liaison with Baird, yet he was seen as an angry young man who spent all day drinking and all night gambling, brawling, and mixing with females of low repute. Lillie's friends despised him, and it's also said that Baird mistreated her. Yet, despite his reputation, they started a relationship. One notable action that Baird did was when he gifted Lillie a 2-year-old horse called Milford. The horse went on to win several races and had a great career. It was thanks to Baird that Lillie developed a stronger passion for breeding, horse racing, and horse ownership. This was the start of a whole new career for Lillie, which she grew to love. Her relationship with Baird ended in March 1893 when he passed away. Following this, she continued to purchase racehorses and moved her training to Sam Pickering's stables at Kempford House. She also moved into Regal Lodge, located in a small village called Kempford near Newmarket. Lillie had a lot of success over the years, with many of her racehorses winning many cups. In 1919, Lillie sold Regal Lodge, as well as everything else she still owned relating to horse racing. Over the 23 years that Regal Lodge was her home, hundreds of celebrities and esteemed guests were received there. Despite this, Lillie decided it was time to move on, so she took up residence in Monaco. Lillie became an American citizen in 1897, and in May of the same year, she divorced her husband Edward Langtry in California. The following month, Edward's statement regarding the divorce was published in the New York Journal. Soon after this, he started to go slightly mad, possibly due to a fall he suffered while on a train. He died a few months later in an asylum, most likely from a brain hemorrhage. In July 1899, Lillie married 28-year-old Hugo Gerald de Bath. By now, she was 46 years old. The wedding took place in Jersey, with the only people present being Lillie's daughter, Jean, and church officials. When Hugo's father died in 1907, he inherited the title of 5th Baronet, as well as many estates and properties in Sussex, Devon, and Ireland. This meant that the couple now had an even larger fortune, and Lillie was now Lady de Bath. These properties were all sold in 1919, before Lillie moved to Monaco. From 1919 until her death, Lillie resided in Monaco, whilst her husband lived in Vence, Alpes-Maritimes. The couple didn't see each other too often, mainly during social events and at private encounters. Lillie remained active during the final years of her life. She frequently travelled to Paris and London, visiting her daughter and grandchildren. She also enjoyed gardening, gambling, visiting racetracks, and seeing her brother. In 1925, she published her memoirs, The Days I Knew. In Monaco, her closest friend was a woman called Mathilde Marie Piet. Lillie Langtry died in Monte Carlo on the 12th of February 1929 of pneumonia. She was 75 years old. She was later buried in St. Saviour's Church in Jersey, alongside her parents. Mathilde Piet, who had been with Lillie up until her death, inherited £10,000, Lillie's Monaco property, and her motor car. Thank you everyone for watching this video on Lillie Langtry. I really hope you enjoyed it. I enjoy researching it quite a lot, so if you have any more suggestions, please leave me a comment or an email, and if you enjoyed, why not like and subscribe. Anyway, I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks!